afternoon. My name is Margot Walters, and I am the Assistant Director for Hope College's Center for Diversity and Inclusion. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the 2026 Women's History Month Lecture. This event is part of an ongoing conversation at Hope College as we celebrate Women's History Month throughout the month of March. Women's History Month invites us not only to reflect on the past, but to also consider how women continue to shape our communities, institutions, and movements for change. Hope's first women graduates were in 1882. However, it was not until the 1930s that women of color matriculated at the college. This history reminds us that progress often comes in stages, and that expanding opportunity and recognition for all women has required persistence, advocacy, and leadership. Decades later, in 1984, our department began when Alfredo Gonzalez was hired as the first director for Minority Student Affairs. At that time, there was only one multicultural student organization, the Black Student Union. Since then, students have continued to build spaces for community, leadership, and advocacy. Today, Hope College is home to several women's organizations, but there is only one Women of Color United. WOCU began as a department organization in 2018 and has grown in a grassroots way to become one of the largest multicultural student organizations on campus. In 2023, the Center for Diversity and Inclusion celebrated the first Women's History Month lecture in collaboration with WOCU as a way to elevate women's voices, experiences, and leadership. The Diversity Lecture Series features distinguished leaders and experts in diversity and inclusion with a focus on research, scholarship, and lived experiences. These lectures create space for cultural celebration, critical reflection, and meaningful dialogue around issues that affect diverse communities. Events like today's lecture are important because women's leadership, advocacy, and contributions have too often been overlooked in traditional narratives of history and public life. By highlighting women leaders, especially those whose perspectives have historically been underrepresented, we affirm the importance of women's voices in shaping policy, building movements, and creating more equitable communities. Today, we are honored to hear a keynote lecture from our first Asian American woman elected to Michigan legislature and a current Michigan State Senator, Senator Stephanie Chang. Her lecture, Identity, Activism, and Advancing Change for Women and Girls, will invite us to reflect how identity shapes leadership, how activism creates pathways for change, and how we can continue to work towards a future where women and girls have the opportunity, representation, and support they deserve. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the land that we stand on and the labor that has shaped it. Together, we acknowledge that we gather as Hope College on the traditional land of the Peoria, Potawatomi, Odawa, and Ojibwa peoples, past and present. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. As a community, we recognize the ever-present systemic inequities that stem directly from past wrongdoings. We acknowledge this long history of injustice and commit to educating ourselves and our community as we seek to honor the legacy and culture of the Indigenous peoples. We recognize, acknowledge, and affirm the historic and contemporary solidarities and intersections between Black and Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge the extraction of brilliance, energy, and the life of labor forced upon people of African descent for more than 400 years. As an organization, we are dedicated to advancing solutions that promote equality, dismantle oppressive systems, and uplift the voices and experiences of marginalized communities. We understand that acknowledging the labor of enslaved people is an essential step in addressing the historical and present-day injustices that continue to shape our society. We carry our ancestors within us, and we are continually called to be better. We commit to dismantling racism in spaces of our work, and we invite you to work beside us to create change. We're grateful to the Culture and Inclusive Excellence Division, the Women of Color United, the Asian Student Union, Hope Democrats, and the Departments of History, Political Science, and Women's and Gender Studies in their support for sponsoring this program. Again, thank you for coming to this lecture. And now, welcoming a musical performance from the Asian Student Union members.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Rachel. This is Charlene, and that's Alyssa, and we'll be performing a song by Wang Lihong, Falling Leaves Return to Roots. It is a Chinese pop song reflecting on longing for home, cultural identity, and emotional connection to one's roots. His song can relate to Women's History Month through the lens of women reclaiming their heritage, finding their voice, and defining their own place in history, similar to how the song focuses on discovering home. Returning to roots can symbolize a metaphorical journey for women to acknowledge the contributions of women throughout history. We hope you enjoy.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mariana Martinez, and I serve as the junior representative for Hope College's Women of Color United. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker today for the 2026 Women's History Month lecture, Michigan Senator Stephanie Chang. Opportunity, access, equity, justice, and service are the core values driving Senator Stephanie Chang, the first Asian American woman elected in the Michigan legislature. She worked as a community organizer in Detroit for nearly a decade before serving 2 terms in the Michigan House of Representatives, and then as a Democratic floor leader for her first term in the Senate. She is currently serving her 2nd term in the Michigan Senate and is the Senate Democratic Policy and Steering Chair. Senator Chang has built a strong track record of getting things done. In the state legislature, she has led on air quality and environmental justice, criminal justice reforms, affordable housing, safe drinking water, and immigrants' rights issues. She has passed bipartisan legislation on a range of issues, including sexual assault education and prevention, and address confidentiality program for survivors of domestic violence. The COVID-19 water shutoff moratorium, the nitrous oxide whippets, re-entry services for wrongly convicted individuals who were exonerated, improving Michigan's maritime economy, support of community crisis, response to mental health emergencies, and establishing Fred Korematsu Day of Civil Liberties and the Constitution. She is proud to have helped secure a historic community benefits agreements for Southwest Detroit residents near the Gordie Howe International Bridge, and is active in her district advocating for the community's needs. She has co-founded the Asian Pacific American Legislative Caucus in Michigan and served as the chair of the Progressive Women's Caucus in 2017 to 2018. She also served as a state director for the Next Gen Climate Michigan, alumni engagement and evaluation coordinator for the Center for Progressive Leadership in Michigan, deputy director for the Campaign for Justice, and as an organizer for Michigan United, One United Michigan. She also worked as a community engagement coordinator for the James and Grace Lee Boggs School and assistant to Grace Lee Boggs, an activist, writer, and speaker. The senator is a co-founder of Asian and Pacific Islander American Vote Michigan and Rising Voices. She also serves on the board of the Southwest Detroit Community Justice Center. Senator Chang earned a bachelor's degree in psychology and master's degree in public policy and social work from the University of Michigan. She lives in Detroit with her husband, Sean Gray, and 2 young daughters. Now please help me welcome Senator Stephanie Chang.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you. It's great to be here, and thank you so much to Hope College Center for Diversity and Inclusion and the many student organizations and academic departments for inviting me to join you today to celebrate Women's History Month. It's an honor to be here, and as we all know, Women's History Month is an important time for us to reflect on the contributions that women have made and the work that continues to improve the lives of women and girls across the globe. How many of you know who Grace Lee Boggs was? All right, we got a few hands. That's exciting. So Grace Lee Boggs lived until the age of 100 and was a Chinese-American writer, philosopher, activist, and organizer in Detroit. She was involved in the Black Power movement and civil rights movement, and she wrote several books, including her own autobiography, Living for Change. She and her husband, James Boggs, founded Detroit Summer, which was a program for young people in Detroit. They are also the namesake for the James and Grace Lee Boggs School on the east side of Detroit, an elementary school walking distance from their home. Grace has inspired generations of activists and writers, and last fall was the 10th commemoration of her passing. So when I first moved to Detroit in 2005, I lived at the Boggs Center to nurture community leadership, and I had met Grace a couple years before as a college student at the University of Michigan when she came to speak. So in the summer of 2005, at the closing ceremony for the Detroit Asian Youth Project, for which I was a mentor, Grace asked me to live at the Boggs Center. And of course, I said yes. So Grace once said, "You cannot change any society unless you take responsibility for it, unless you see yourself as belonging to it and are responsible for changing it." So this afternoon, I'll share a little bit about my journey and how my identity as a woman of color, as a daughter of immigrants, and as a mom has shaped my work as a community organizer turned public servant. Grace's words ring true for me because a key part of my own activism and leadership has been rooted in my sense of identity and in my rootedness in the community. So I grew up in Canton, Michigan, which is incredibly diverse now, but definitely did not feel that way when I was in elementary school, during which most of the time I was the only Asian American kid in my class. As a daughter of Taiwanese American immigrants, I grew up going to Chinese language school on Saturday and feeling very much like I had two separate lives: American school during the week, and then my Chinese and Taiwanese friends on the weekends. And I remember the occasional teasing or Chang type of comments that unfortunately probably many of my Asian American peers and young people now too are familiar with. And I remember in middle school that someone actually chalked a racial slur on the side of my family's house, but it wasn't my parents who told me about it. It was my older sister. My guess is that my parents were trying to shield me as their younger daughter from racism. But I also remember learning about my heritage and my language at Chinese school and having a space for people who looked like me, who shared experiences with me, and similar family experiences. And I remember running around those halls and having fun and being more outspoken and feeling a sense of identity at Chinese school. So later on, when I started high school, I remember my mom telling me to join the Asian American Student Club at the school. The club had Richard Mui as the advisor, and I'm fairly certain he was the only Asian American teacher at the school at the time. So in that club, we had workshops where we talked about issues affecting the Asian American community. We put on a cultural show every year, and we went to events at the University of Michigan. And I remember reading Helen Zia's book, Asian American Dreams, during high school because Richard Mui suggested that I read it, and it changed my life. Reading about Vincent Chin and his murder and other aspects of Asian American history helped make a lot of things make sense for me and gave me a better understanding of things that my family had gone through and that the Asian American community in Michigan had gone through, leading to where we are today. So I went on to go to the University of Michigan, and in addition to my psychology major, I also minored in Asian Pacific Islander American Studies. And being Asian American and being a woman of color certainly played a role in the work that I did after graduating undergrad. So after I graduated from the University of Michigan, I joined the team at One United Michigan. We built coalitions and we organized volunteers to educate Michiganders across our state about affirmative action and the potential harms of the ballot initiative that came to our state in 2006. I learned how to build local teams, how to write an op-ed, how to work with different groups across race, age, religion, and political beliefs. And I also made sure to organize with Asian American community members so that we weren't left out of the picture or used as a wedge, and so that we were also expressing our own views in support of affirmative action. Unfortunately, we were not successful that year in preserving affirmative action programs in our state, but I learned so many skills and I formed friendships that have lasted 2 decades so far. After that campaign, I joined the staff of the ACLU of Michigan, and we spun off a coalition called the Campaign for Justice, which was a group that was dedicated to reforming Michigan's indigent defense system to make sure that every person, regardless of how much money they have, accused of a crime has access to effective legal representation. So I helped build a bipartisan coalition. I learned the ins and outs and many of the faults of our criminal justice system. I met people who had been wrongfully convicted and later exonerated, and I was part of the team that ultimately passed bipartisan indigent defense reform legislation. During this time, I also co-founded APIA Vote Michigan, an Asian American civic engagement group focused on nonpartisan voter registration and mobilization, immigrants' rights and immigration reform, voting rights, and redistricting. Later, I decided to go back to grad school, so I went to the University of Michigan for my public policy and social work dual degrees, with the original plan to return to the nonprofit advocacy sector afterward. But those plans didn't materialize. I was instead encouraged to run for the Michigan State House by my friend and State House predecessor, Rashida Tlaib, who is now a member of Congress. In a field of 7 candidates in the Democratic primary, my team and I worked incredibly hard. I knocked on all the possible doors twice, and I won. And I became the first Asian American woman elected to the Michigan legislature in 2014. And I started in the State House in 2015, pregnant with my first daughter. And then in 2019, when I began in the State Senate, I was actually pregnant with my second daughter. So I became the first woman to give birth while serving in the Michigan Senate. During my time in the Michigan legislature, my identities as a woman of color, as a social worker, as a daughter of immigrants, and as a mom has certainly shaped the lens that I have on issues facing our state, how I vote, and what types of legislation I choose to prioritize, thinking about opportunity for all, equity, access, and justice. And so gender violence is an issue that I've been really proud to work on in a bipartisan way over my legislative career. And I've met many incredible survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence, as well as so many leaders of organizations and fearless attorneys on this amazing journey. I've chosen to prioritize this work, among others, because of a commitment to advancing change for women and girls here in Michigan. So I'll share 3 examples. The first example is a bipartisan sexual assault package that we worked on for actually quite a long time. As you may know, 1 in 9 girls under the age of 18 experience sexual assault or abuse at the hands of an adult. Many cases are never reported to law enforcement. Many victims never receive the counseling support that they deserve. And research shows that oftentimes it is the response from the first person that the victim tells that ultimately dictates whether or not they feel believed, whether they feel supported, and whether or not that person reports the sexual assault to law enforcement officials, and whether or not to seek help. Many of us know personally the ramifications of a close loved one telling a family member or friend what happened and being dismissed or disbelieved. Years later, after never reporting what happened, these experiences continue to affect their daily lives. And this speaks volumes about the need to change the culture around sexual assault in our state. And I recognize that we need to ensure that young people know where to turn for help if they or a close friend has experienced sexual assault, and also so that we can prevent young people from becoming future perpetrators. So the bill that I championed for many years that did finally become law requires the Michigan Department of Education to develop age and developmentally appropriate educational materials and information to students in grades 6 to 12 on sexual misconduct. In 2016 and 2017, the young women in my Girls Making Change Fellowship program, which trains high school girls of color on leadership and community change, selected sexual assault awareness and prevention as their community action project. And they did an incredible peer survey, and they found that a majority of fellow students were either a survivor themselves or knew someone who is. And an overwhelming number of those peers felt that they had never received education about this topic in school. But I know that arming our young people with knowledge is a critical step in combating sexual assault. So my bill that is now law ensures that students get that educational material, not just what is sexual assault and sexual harassment, but also how to identify what it is, an explanation that it's not the victim's fault, and resources in the community, which is really important. It also encourages schools to provide employees with training about how to respond to students who are survivors when they disclose. As this bill advanced, many people across our state reached out to me with heartbreaking stories. Some said, "I didn't know that what happened to me was sexual assault." Others said, "Oh, I wish that I had known how to help when my daughter disclosed what happened to her." And this is why education is so critical. When a young person discloses their abuse, the response of the person they tell sets the course for whether or not they're going to get help. Educating young people will help victims to recognize abuse and their peers to know how to help. In the wake of the Larry Nassar scandal in 2018, my legislative colleagues and I also recognized that we need to ensure that medical professionals have clear guidelines and standards regarding intravaginal treatment, and that they are clearly prohibited from assaulting a patient under the guise of medical treatment. Doctors are trusted professionals, and they should never be allowed to take advantage of their position of authority to commit such heinous crimes. And it did take several years to get this bipartisan bill package to the finish line, but we did it. The second example that I wanted to share is around misdemeanor domestic violence. So in 2023, we passed domestic violence and firearms legislation that was also 5 years in the making. We finally took action to protect domestic violence survivors from firearm injury and abuse in their own homes. Nearly half of all women murdered in the United States are killed by a current or former intimate partner, and more than half of those intimate partner homicides are by firearm. Women are 5 times more likely to be murdered by an abusive partner when that abuser has access to a gun. Wayne County Prosecutor Kim Worthy's office was the first to come to me with an idea for this legislation back in 2018. So we worked with domestic violence experts, gun violence prevention organizations, gun violence survivors themselves, as well as law enforcement stakeholders to develop and refine legislation that will save countless lives. More than anyone else, though, I'm really grateful for those who shared their tragic yet powerful stories of losing their loved ones to gun violence, like the Emilian family in Kalamazoo, whose daughter Maggie was killed by her ex-boyfriend in a dorm room. They turned their pain into purpose. And we know, unfortunately, that domestic violence is something that can escalate. What might be a more minor incident the first time or the second time might become a more violent or dangerous offense later on. So the new laws that we have passed keep firearms out of the hands of people likely to be a danger to others, individuals already convicted of misdemeanor domestic violence. They are prohibited now from possessing, purchasing, selling, or transporting a gun for 8 years after the completion of their sentence. Survivors of domestic violence endure unimaginable pain and betrayal, and the goal of these laws is to ensure that they have the peace of mind knowing they will be protected from threats of gun violence at the hands of their abusers. And the passage of these bills are, I think, a really shining example of what it means to turn tragedy into real policy change, and also what it means to hear the voices of Michiganders and move toward action. The third example I wanted to share is around personal protection orders, and this one is still a work in progress. Last August, in August 2025, Latricia Brown was stalked and murdered in her workplace by her estranged ex-husband, Mario Green, at Henry Ford Health's main hospital in Detroit. She had been stalked for a long time and was fearful of what might happen next. She actually had been granted a personal protection order, but that order had not yet been served. In her July petition for a PPO, she said, "I have tried being cordial because I feel that the system has now let me down each time that I have tried to make reports on this man. My father was murdered, and now with this situation, I am in mental distress and scared, not knowing what to do, where I have PTSD of this whole situation. I have to constantly look over my shoulder to make sure this man is not following me to hurt me like he has done in the past with physical abuse. I am asking for help before this goes too far and things are too late." Unfortunately, Latricia's PPO was never served on her ex-husband. So about a month after she petitioned, she was in her workplace at Henry Ford Hospital, and he entered the basement, pulled out a handgun, and shot Latricia several times, and she is no longer with us. Michigan is an outlier in the United States where 43 states, the District of Columbia, and 2 territories require that PPO service on the abuser take place free of charge. But in Michigan, the cost to serve a PPO doesn't even just include the service fee, it can also include the mileage traveled to deliver that PPO, which can sometimes be $100 or more. In fact, we know that costs vary from county to county, so a PPO recipient in one county might have to pay twice as much as a survivor in another county to ensure their safety. The law does currently allow a victim to identify a friend or family member to serve the PPO, but we know from common sense that that can lead to a dangerous situation. So the bills that we have worked on, Senate Bills 611 to 612, will require that a PPO be served as soon as practicable within 72 hours at no cost to the victim by a law enforcement agency as designated by a judge. And that law enforcement agency would be reimbursed for the cost of that service from the PPO Service Fund, which we were pleased to secure $1 million for in the last budget. The Violence Against Women Act actually is supposed to ensure that a PPO granted in one state must be enforced equally in any state. But in Michigan, we know that victims are being left behind if they are unable to pay their PPO service fee. And we know that it takes a lot of courage for someone who's experiencing domestic violence to ask for help, to share details of what one has gone through, put it on paper, and file a petition for a PPO for a judge to consider is a truly brave and extraordinary step. And when someone is reaching out for help and trying to protect themselves, we should not be putting up a financial barrier to their safety. Quite simply, it is time that we remove this unnecessary and dangerous barrier for those experiencing domestic violence, stalking, harassment, or assault. The impact of this legislation will be felt not just by victims, but also their families and coworkers. So now I'm going to turn to some other issues, issues facing immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers during this chaotic time, and how women of color are impacted, and also how they are leading the way. And I'll share 3 examples of truly inspirational women who I am proud to call my friends. The first person I will talk about is Ann Vu. She is the wife of Liu Yang. You might have heard his story sometime over the past year. So Liu Yang is a Hmong refugee who was born in a refugee camp in Thailand after the Vietnam War. His family, like other Hmong people, were recruited by the CIA to fight a secret war, and they saved countless American soldiers. Liu came to the United States with his family as a refugee when he was a very young child. Liu now is an auto worker in St. John's, Michigan, and he is the president of the Hmong Family Association. He is a proud father and a primary caretaker of an elderly grandmother. In the 1990s, when he was a teenager, he was convicted of a low-level home invasion, but he never entered the victim's home. And he was actually just in the car with his friends. His conviction was expunged many years later under Michigan law in 2018, but it remained on his private record. So last summer, this expunged minor conviction was used as the basis for ICE arresting him as he was leaving work. ICE detained him 4 months at the North Lake Processing Center in Baldwin, Michigan. Ann Vu, his wife, as well as Representative Mai Song, Liu's attorney Nancy, Congressman Tom Barrett, myself, Rising Voices, the Asian Law Caucus, and the Michigan Immigrants' Rights Center, and hundreds of Michiganders rallied around Liu's case, making phone calls and emails to ICE urging his release, and making calls and emails to the governor as well to urge her to issue a pardon of his conviction. In the fall, he and many other detainees were actually put on a plane that was set to take them to Laos and other Asian countries for deportation. That same day, Governor Whitmer pardoned his decades-old conviction, and luckily the plane had to go back to Louisiana for a totally different reason, which gave us some more time. Liu's team successfully advocated for a stay of deportation and ultimately got ICE to return him from Louisiana to Michigan. And thankfully, in December, ICE released him to his family. It was an incredible win for Liu and his family and the Hmong community. And I have gotten to know Ann a lot over the past year. She has courageously told her husband's story over and over again at press conferences, rallies, and town halls. And she not only has been an incredible advocate for her own husband, but she remains to this day in communication with the wives of others who are detained still at the North Lake Processing Center, keeping track of issues with medical care at the facility and finding out what people need. She has also provided an important role in supporting other impacted families whose breadwinners are detained or deported, helping connect people with childcare resources, checking in on family members, and letting us elected officials know what she is hearing on the ground. Ann is a remarkable example of how women of color are showing up during this trying time, with courage, with conviction, and with persistence. She is now a source of strength and knowledge for others whose families are impacted. Next, I want to share about my friend Miriam Stone. Ernesto Cuevas Enciso was brought to the United States of America from Mexico at the young age of 3, along with his younger sister, my friend Miriam, whom I have known since she was in high school. Ernesto was previously a Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, recipient. He is a construction worker. He's a married man with a loving United States citizen wife and a 1-year-old daughter. America is the only country that he can truly call home. His only trouble with the law was a more than decade ago nonviolent misdemeanor offense, which was minor in possession. Ernesto has work authorization, he has a Michigan driver's license, he has a pending application for a legal permanent residency, otherwise known as green card, and has been following the immigration process just as our country has encouraged immigrants to do. On December 6th, he and another construction worker were near their job site in Ypsilanti when an unmarked vehicle approached them and they were arrested. Ernesto is a hardworking immigrant man who cares for his family and has just been attempting to follow our nation's pathway to become a green card holder. He's a primary caretaker for his ailing father. He is not a safety risk, and he deserves to be home with his wife and young child, not held in detention hours away while awaiting the immigration process. He deserves to be home in Detroit with his family and to continue contributing to our state and to our economy. And like Anne, Miriam has done countless media interviews about her brother Ernesto. She has lifted up his story as many times as possible, and she also started a GoFundMe account to raise funds to pay for his lawyer. I was able to join Miriam and her family as they visited Ernesto in December up at the North Lake Processing Center. It was both moving and heartbreaking all at the same time. Ernesto's case is ongoing, and Miriam, like Anne, has shown incredible strength, perseverance, and commitment as a sister, organizer, and community leader. Third amazing woman that I wanted to share is Dr. Sadie Sarr. She is the founder of ABISA, which is the African Bureau for Immigration and Social Affairs, an organization dedicated to advancing the rights, dignity, and well-being of Black immigrants. As she said in an interview with Global Michigan, our work helped to bring visibility to Black immigrants in Michigan, a community that existed but was unnamed and unsupported in systems, data, and policy. By naming the community, we created a platform for advocacy and pushed institutions to acknowledge and serve us. We also connected Black immigrant experiences to the broader landscape of racial and social justice in the United States. Over the past year, I have seen Dr. Sadie's work up close as she continues to advocate not only for other community members, but also her own nephews, who have been swept up in the ongoing mass detention and deportation effort. Morba, he is 19 years old. He's a student at Western International High School in Southwest Detroit, and he arrived in the United States from Senegal at the age of 17 and has a pending asylum application. He has a 3.12 GPA. He was ranked 5th in his class, and his teachers have described him as respectful, disciplined, and as a quiet leader. Moore was pulled over on November 26, 2025 by, again, unmarked vehicles. Immigration enforcement agents were looking for Mr. Nias, and although Moore is not that man, he was detained anyway, and he was held at the North Lake Processing Center in Baldwin for many months. Moore has simply been following the immigration process and trying to gain asylum as he seeks a better life in Detroit. The students, teachers, and community leaders have spoken up about how respectful he is and have spoken publicly about their desire for ICE to keep Moore here in the United States. It has been really inspiring watching Dr. Sadie advocate for her nephew, Moore. I was honored to join ABISA for a welcome home party in January as he was released on bond, but again, his case is also ongoing. But it was moving to see his community wrap their arms around him to celebrate and also to commit the hard work ahead. Dr. Sadie has not let up. She continues to advocate not just for Moore, but also another nephew of hers and other African immigrants and asylum seekers detained by ICE. It is women like Anne, Miriam, and Sadie who keep me inspired as we continue to advocate for dignity, justice, and common sense policies for immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. This Women's History Month, I'm grateful for the women who have led the way and made history in the past, and I'm also grateful for the women around us who are making history every day. And today, I'm thinking about what lessons we can learn from Dorothy Height, an African-American social worker and civil rights and women's rights activist. Some of you probably know this story. She was denied admission to Barnard College because of her race, but she didn't give up, and she went to college at NYU and got her social work degree there as well. After working in various positions at the YWCA, she was the president of the National Council of Negro Women for 40 years. She worked on voter registration in the South. She worked on lynching issues as well as criminal justice reforms. While she headed the NCNW, she worked alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., John Lewis, A. Philip Randolph, Whitney Young, and other men. She is largely recognized as the first leader in the civil rights movement to call out inequality for women and African Americans as intertwined, connected issues that must be worked on together. Ms. Height said, "If the times aren't ripe, you have to ripen the times." So what can we learn from Dorothy Height? Her intersectional approach, pushing her way to the table among other leaders who were all men, not ever giving up even after being told no, and having a clarity of purpose can inspire all of us during a time when we need to find our own place in various movements. There are so many who came before us who broke barriers and pushed forward despite the many obstacles. So when you face a challenge that seems insurmountable, think about how we can stand on Ms. Height's shoulders, ripen the times, and change the conditions around us to make things better. Thank you so much, and happy Women's History Month.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Josephine Navarro, and I have the honor of serving as the Culture and Inclusion Representative for Women of Color United. Thank you all for showing up today, and not just to celebrate Women's History Month, but to hear some words of wisdom, knowledge, and empowerment from Senator Chang. We are now going to move into the Q&A portion, so if you have any questions, we truly encourage you, go ahead and scan the QR code on the screen right up there and submit them. And if you would like pen and paper, we'll have some volunteers over there and then over there in the back. Just raise your hand and we'll get it to you. All right, so to get us started, I'd love to ask one of my own questions. Listening to your lecture and the work you do with sexual abuse, immigration rights, justice, and policy itself was very inspiring. My question is, what advice can you give us as college students and staff in order to foster solidarity like you do within our community?
That is a great question. So when I was a college student, I was involved in a number of student organizations that were very much focused on bringing people together. Mm-hmm. And it was everything from we put together this coalition called Student Voices in Action, and I don't remember all of the details of what we worked on, but it was a number of different student organizations that came together to advocate to our university administration for certain changes. But we also did things like have potlucks, right? And so it's, you can do the hard sort of like issue-based things, but then sometimes it's also just literally breaking bread together and having conversations about things. So I feel like we are definitely in this time right now where having those relationships is so important, especially, people are going through a lot right now, right? And so, and whether it's things that you're experiencing personally or things you're seeing in the community or things you're just watching on the news in this really chaotic, crazy time that we're in, and sometimes it helps to just have other people to process with and to just feel like you're not alone in trying to process all of the things that are happening. So I definitely would encourage students and other, university staff, faculty, et cetera, to provide as many spaces as you can to just get together and talk about things, because I know that sometimes it can feel really, really heavy.
Thank you. Yeah, I know our social work community has a group that meet to talk about these issues. So it does feel nicer to have those groups and connections on campus.
That's good.
Yeah. The next question, your lecture focuses on the relationships between identity and activism. As the first Asian American woman elected to the Michigan legislature, how has your identity shaped the way you approach your leadership role and work with policy?
Yeah. So I talked a little bit about this, but I'll expand on it more. Being an Asian American woman, being a woman of color, and being a daughter of immigrants, all of those things have definitely shaped a lot of the work that I've chosen to focus on. And I think I also, because I was the first Asian American woman, I co-founded the Asian American Caucus. So we brought together lawmakers, not just Asian American lawmakers, but also those that represent districts with a large Asian American population, and provided an opportunity for people to hear from community leaders about what was going on. And then over the years have really been able to help champion different things facing the Asian American community. And whether it was language access or passing the Fred Korematsu Day bill, those are all things that came directly from community members who said, we want someone to advance this type of legislation. And so, I think that, being Asian American and being a woman of color, choosing to focus on those things, in part because, there weren't that many of us, so it kind of really fell, I think, on those of us that were there to hone in on those things. But one other example that I'll share is during the COVID pandemic, when there was this surge in anti-Asian hate that was going on. I think that having Asian American representation in the legislature was really important because we were able to pass resolution condemning anti-Asian hate. We were able to call our Attorney General and ask her to be part of a press conference with us talking about her hate crimes unit. We were able to advocate for money in the state budget for more Know Your Rights outreach. And so I definitely think that my strong sense of identity and also being really connected with what was going on in the community, I think was a big part of being able to successfully push for those things. And so I think for college students, or regardless of what other careers people may be exploring, being able to, always be proud of who you are and, letting your identity guide some of the work that you want to do, I think is really important.
Thank you. All right. During your time as a community organizer, how did your grassroots work influence the way you advocate for communities today in government?
Such great questions. This is great. I think that it plays a role all the time. So because I come from organizing and much of the work that I did prior to running for office was about building coalitions, that is just kind of what I continue to do. And actually, I remember that when I was in this really intense process of trying to even decide about whether or not I wanted to run for office, one of the things that Rashida told me was that I could still be an organizer. I would just be organizing my colleagues. And she was actually true. It was right. She's also very convincing. But so that was really persuasive. But it definitely is true, right? Because being able to convince someone of something or knowing what someone's interests are, or knowing what's going on in someone's district across the state and why they might potentially care about the thing that I'm trying to get done. Those are all things that I learned, right, as an organizer, is like what makes people tick, what are the things someone cares about, and how does it intersect with the thing that I'm trying to also get them to work on together. And then also really being able to have that strong connection with groups on the ground that are doing work, right? So having that inside-outside strategy of, I'm here doing this thing, but I'm also closely communicating with people who are mobilizing, who are getting people to call and email their lawmakers. And I think that, I think about the fact that right now, I've spent a lot of time working on immigrants' rights issues, my entire career, but also right now during this moment, I think that having that organizing background has been really helpful because I'm helping organize in the community, but also being able to use my office as an elected official to help give a platform for people to tell their stories. So we held a community hearing a couple weeks ago in Detroit, where we had people for like 2.5 hours come and talk about, maybe 2 hours. It actually was almost 2.5 hours, but people came and talked about people that they knew that were impacted. People came and shared their own stories. And so I think that using my organizer background, recognizing the power of people sharing their stories, those are all things that I bring, and then now being able to, continue using the power of the letterhead and advocating to ICE, or being able to help call reporters and get attention on certain things, I think is all, a part of this puzzle.
Oh, that's amazing. Can you give some recommendations or strategies of how students can get involved in activism and policymaking, especially after graduation, or even while we're a student?
Yeah. Well, there is no shortage of issues to get involved in right now, because there are a lot of crises happening. So I would say, obviously as college students, you all have a lot to deal with. But I think that now, especially when you're on a college campus and you have access to amazing professors and departments and resources that can help you connect with different issues or organizations that need volunteers, or that that you could be a really great maybe potential board member for, or something like that. I would say don't wait until graduating. Figure out. Though I think one thing that is important is to figure out what is 1 or 2 things that you really care about, because otherwise, if you care about all of these things and then it just feels overwhelming, then you'll just maybe get paralyzed. So I think being able to hone in on, all right, what is 1 or 2 things that I'm passionate about, that I know some things about, or maybe I have a personal connection to, and then figuring out, okay, well, who's the group who are the groups or departments or whatever out there that are working on this, and then plugging in, because there is no shortage of groups looking for help or events to go to, and there's, like I said, there's a million crises going on right now.
Thank you. What advice do you have for students who want to run for office but don't feel they have the resources?
Yeah, so I think that obviously it's an election year right now, and so if you're even thinking about one day running for office, I would encourage you to find a candidate that you really believe in, and get involved in their campaign this year, and because I think that is something that's just really helpful to be able to know what a campaign feels like, looks like, and being able to get that experience is, I think, really important. But I also think that if you're thinking about running in the future, it's also important to, again, do sort of what I just mentioned before, is figuring out not just what you want to do, but also what are the 1 or 2 issues that you really care about, so that you can become expert on those things, and that you are showing up for the community already, and plugged into the groups that you're going to probably one day ask for their support if you run for office. So being able to just be connected with what's going on is super important, and especially if you're thinking about running for office in the future.
Thank you. I know you kind of talked about this, but you work with issues that affect women and families. What changes do you believe are most urgent right now to better support for our community?
So there's a lot of different issues going on, and I think it probably depends on who we're talking about. But I think that there are, I talked about the gender violence issues that we're working on. I talked about the immigrants' rights issues. I mean, those are definitely, I think, pretty big crises. But I think that, we know that there are a lot of folks who are struggling just to make it right now. Everything is becoming more expensive. And so obviously that is not just a women and girls issue, that's an everyone issue, but it definitely impacts women and girls even more, right? Because you think about moms and trying to support their babies, and there's just a lot of added dynamics there. But we have been working for about a decade now on the issue of unaffordable water bills, which is also sort of related to the rising cost of our energy bills. And then, of course, there are so many other things, right? Just being able to, no one can afford to buy a home right now, right? So all of these things, I think, are really challenging. And then when you add in gender as another layer, I think we also see sort of childcare is also really expensive. So that also, there's a number of issues where it affects everyone, but then adding on a layer of gender, there's even more there in terms of the disparate impact on women and especially women of color.
Mm-hmm. I feel like a lot of the problems, it's a lot of underfunded resource, I would say underfunded communities that are cause not as much education. Is there a way we could advocate for more funds? Because in the child welfare system, there's not a lot of funds. There's not a lot of funds for trauma-informed practice. So, yeah, my question is what advice for that?
Just resources generally to support communities, yeah. I mean, that's, I think, a really important thing for people to get involved in. A lot of times people think of advocacy as calling about a specific bill, which is also yes, please do that. But also, oftentimes we need help advocating for funding priorities, right? And so a budget, we say, is a reflection of our values. And so we have, I actually think in Michigan over the past few years, we've done a pretty good job at funding a number of priorities, although we can do better. But right now, we're in a divided legislature. And so sometimes some of the things that I care about might be a little bit different from what someone else cares about. And so finding that balance is and making sure that things don't get forgotten is super important. And so, childcare and making sure that we are appropriately funding childcare subsidies, super important. Making sure that we are, I talked about some of the issues around gender violence. All of the groups who receive funding at the federal level for serving victims of crime, all of them are getting less money due to, not even due to this current federal administration, it's also just due to the way that the funding formula is set up at the federal level. And so as a state, are we going to prioritize trying to backfill some of that? Well, it's a priority for me, but I have to try to convince other people that it's a priority as well, right? And when we talk about mental health, or we talk about, housing, supportive housing, transitional housing, all of those things, making sure that people prioritize it over other things is so important, because we, again, a budget is a reflection of our values, and sometimes when we look at those budget documents, we have to really think about, who are we really serving and who are we prioritizing?
Thank you. All right, our next question. What perspectives or strengths do women of color bring to activism or even leadership?
Say it again.
What perspectives or strengths do women of color bring to activism or even leadership?
So, I think that women of color, we bring our own experiences, and they're not all the same, right? But we bring our own experiences. We bring I think a set of resilience and strength that is important to acknowledge. I also think that because we are both women and people of color, there is that intersection of some of the challenges also and the barriers that we face, right? But I think that we bring a lot of strength to the work that we do. And I also think that, I think it's important to remember those strengths and to bring them to the things that we are trying to accomplish, and especially when there are barriers put in front of us. I love that quote from Dorothy Height about when the times aren't ripen the times, right? You don't need to wait for someone else to make things better for you to then you know, be at that table, like just make a way, just figure it out. And I feel like women, and especially women of color, like we're good at that. We just figure it out. We figure out a way, especially like as moms and moms of color too. Those of us in the room, like we just figure it out. We just like put a million challenges in front of us. We will just figure out a way because that's just what we do. So,
Yeah, women of color are very strong.
yeah.
Can you talk more about how you keep advocating for change when it takes so much time, effort, and setbacks?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, so I guess a different way of thinking about that question is also like, what keeps you going, right? And so, and it's different for everyone. I think for me, especially when there's setbacks and like there are literally issues that I've been working on for 11 years that still have not gotten done, right? And so like, that's really frustrating. But at the same time, like we have to keep going. And I think that one of the things that does help keep me going is well, two things. One, like I being an organizer and working with such incredible people who are on the ground advocating for the changes that we need is really inspiring, right? And so, you know, thinking about the people who have been dealing with water shutoffs, or thinking about, you know, the women who are advocating for their husbands or brothers or nephews facing immigration consequences. I mean, like all of those stories help keep me going because like I'm doing this work, I care about it. But there are people who are like, this is impacting their lives, who need us to partner with them to get these things done. And so I feel like a strong sense of commitment to that. And then the other thing that keeps me grounded is my kids, right? Like I have the 6-year-old and 10-year-old daughters. They're really amazing. And I think that, you know, they are a constant reminder of the fact that they deserve a better future than what we have right now. And so they deserve that. And so I've got to, as their mom, it's part of my responsibility to fight for the future that they deserve.
That's amazing. Oh. All right. What was one of your biggest setbacks as a woman of color in Michigan politics? And what was one of the biggest challenges, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of challenges, right? There's lots of strengths that we bring, but there's definitely challenges as well. I think that one thing that we still need to grapple with, right, is that we still have not seen women of color in like the highest levels of office in Michigan or at the federal level. And we have a lot of work to do still. And so sometimes there might be, even if they're not stated out loud, I think sometimes there are biases that still exist, right, about women of color and whether or not we are capable or deserving of some of those highest leadership positions. And so it's important to sort of counter those with leadership, regardless of title. And so I think that is critical. And then I think about, you know, women of color who are in other fields who also face barriers, right? Whether it's medicine or social work or the legal profession or anything else, being able to gain the respect of people around you. Sometimes it's like can be a frustrating thing to have to do, and you just have to do it in the way of just like knowing your stuff and just delivering, regardless of what other people are going to question or say. And so that persistence and that strength is so important, and I also think that it's important for women of color to support each other. And regardless of the field or career or setting, it's so important. And across racial lines as well, right? So, you know, I serve in the Michigan Senate right now. There are 5 women of color in the legislature, in the Senate anyway. 3 Black women, 1 Latina, and then 1 Asian American woman, and we try to have each other's backs. Sometimes it's not stated that that is what we're doing, but it is what we're doing, right? It's like we support one each other, we help lift up each other's bills, we try to work together to advance certain issues. When we worked on legislation around maternal health, and specifically Black maternal health, like it was the 5 of us who did that together. And so I think it's really important for us to have each other's backs as well, because we, more than others, kind of know, what we might be going through.
You mentioned how long it took to pass a few of these common sense bills. What do you find to be the biggest hindrance to timely legislation?
What is the biggest hindrance to?
Timely legislation.
Oh. Well, so I think like with a lot of different legislation, sometimes the biggest challenge is just getting people to prioritize it, regardless of what the issue is, right? Like I've worked on a lot of different issues in the past 11 years in the legislature, and oftentimes it's like just trying to keep the issue on people's radar as like, this is a thing that people care about and we need to do it. And of course it can be challenging to bring people along, especially if it might be seen as more controversial. But I think it's super important that persistence, finding creative ways to bring an issue to the forefront, working with people on the ground to make sure that they are also mobilizing support around an issue. All of those things are important.
What's a way to like keep people engaged and like to keep thinking about it? Because I know even with issues today, a lot of people are desensitized and don't really like pay attention to the problems. What's a way to keep people thinking about it?
Well, I think it's hard, right? Because we have so many things and like there are so many crises, and like something might be in the news one day and then like a whole nother crisis pops up the next day. And so it is hard to keep people's attention. And so that's why I think it's important to be proactive and to try to force things back onto the agenda in terms of like constantly sharing people's stories, right? Like, so that's what I've been doing a lot of when it comes to immigrants' rights issues. Like, of course, I'm pushing specific policies as well, but I also know that policies aren't going to get done unless people like recognize immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers as human beings deserving of respect and dignity. And so the humanizing of people who are facing detention, the humanizing of people who are like literally just doing what we ask them to do by going through the immigration process is so important. And so even while like a million other crises are going on, I still am like, hey, don't forget this is still happening. This is like in our own state. We have, you know, the biggest detention center in the Midwest, and like constantly just trying to remind people of these stories. And sometimes you also have to get creative. So it's like, okay, what other voice can I bring in? Is it a faith leader who can talk about their congregation that's impacted? Is it a social worker who can talk about their clients? Is it, a teacher who can talk about their students? So finding other voices and finding other people who can like help keep an issue on the radar is really important. Because I am also very aware that sometimes people tune out if they hear from the same people over and over again. But I think like with this issue in particular, we've seen it go up and down, right? Like we've seen people get engaged for the first time on immigrants' rights and like welcome and thank you. And then there's also those who have been working on this for decades, right? And so, but trying to keep people there is so important. And the thing that I am very cognizant of is that there are many people who came to try to help now that they see like there are people who have literally been murdered by our federal government. But in my mind, one thing that is going to be really important for us to think about is how do we keep people engaged so that 3 years down the line, 5 years, 10 years down the line, when we have, I mean, hopefully it's not 10 years from now, hopefully it's a lot sooner than that, but when we have the opportunity to actually make real change at the federal level, that we keep people engaged and willing to push for hard things, and not just when there's horrific body cam footage, but also when we know that there are still people who are going to be impacted, but maybe not in as much like in your face type of way. So I think it's important for people to remember how they felt watching those videos, and like keep that with them, so that we can, when the time comes, be able to make the change that we need.
Thank you. Politics are becoming more and more polarized. How do you maintain bipartisan relationships with your colleagues?
Yeah. So I just did like a couple weeks ago, I did a whole event about this with Senator John DeMoose, who's my Republican colleague and friend from Northern Michigan. And this is actually a really great example because we have worked together on water affordability, we've worked together on human trafficking, we've worked together on probably other things that I just can't remember right now. He's a Republican, I'm a Democrat. He is a great partner, and a lot of it is just, we are friends. We've gotten to know each other. I've met his family. I think he's met my family as well, and like we know each other on a personal level. We ask questions of each other. We recognize that there are things that we are just unlikely to ever agree on, and that's totally fine, but we're able to come together on issues that we know affect people in both our districts, and that is really important. And so, yes, it's a very polarizing time, but I think that it's important to find opportunities to work with people that you normally might disagree with on other things. If there's like this one thing that you agree on, find a way to work on it together, because maybe that can also open up conversations about others, right? Like I think about, so like he and I have worked together on several issues now, and we are not exactly on the same page on immigration, but I also know that he is like, he's not extreme, and like he cares about refugees, he cares about immigrant populations, but at the same time, like what are the types of policies that he would be able to support, like figuring out what those are, that is like the nuanced part of the conversation that we still have to get to, but you can't get to that without first, an acknowledgement of like where we're coming from as human beings, and a recognition from him that some of the things that are happening are wrong.
You have a bachelor's degree in psychology. What made you choose to work in politics?
Yeah, so I kind of like sped through that part of the story. So yeah, so I was originally pre-law. I then later decided, like, you know what, I don't want to be a lawyer, so then I majored in psychology, and was definitely not planning to run for office. And as was stated, I worked as an organizer for about 10 years before running for office, and so it was really. I had spent a good amount of time actually trying to get other people to run for office, but when Rashida asked me to run, and I eventually recognized that it was an amazing way to make an impact in a different way.
Oh, that's cool. All right. I think this is our last question. Could you talk more about your experience working alongside Grace Lee Boggs, and what was one of the most memorable experiences you had?
Yes, so I lived at the Boggs Center from 2005 to 2007, and that was definitely an amazing experience. And I definitely think that moving to Detroit and living at the Bog Center for those 2 years definitely shaped sort of a lot of who I am and what I do, because if I had moved to Detroit and lived anywhere else, I probably would be a different person. So just literally being around her, so I lived there and I was sort of like her assistant, so I helped, when people from literally around the world would come and try to, and like talk to her and have meetings with her in her living room a lot of the times, and then it helped, organize different events. All of that, just like being a part of her network where people were having conversations with her, was really powerful. And I also think that being there and talking with her and like being a part of that network really helped to shape my understanding that change happens from the bottom up. And so a lot of times, there were conversations about like how people in Detroit, right? It was like different block clubs and organizations just starting to just figure out a way to solve problems. They weren't waiting for anyone else to solve them for them. They were, creating their own gardens or creating like a hope district, and like finding ways to lift up survivors of gun violence. And so, so many examples that I learned through being at the Bog Center were all about just like that grassroots, literally block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood change. And I think that really gave me a strong sense of like, this is the core of like how things can happen.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. As we wrap up, let's give a huge thank you to Senator Chang. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, insights, and wisdom with us today. If there's one thing to take away from this, it's that we all have the power to be agents of change, advocate for equity and inclusion in our communities. And now for some local announcements. Women of Color United will be hosting Radiance and Recognition on March 17th at 5 p.m. at the Kreisinga Art Museum, so tomorrow. This event is a space for us to come together to celebrate the strength, brilliance, and impact of women within our communities. We would love to see you all there. We also invite you to stop by the Van Wylen Library to check out our Read the Room book display collaboration with the library. And thank you all. And before you go, make sure to mark your calendars. Our last event for the Diversity Lecture Series is the 2026 Asian Heritage Month Lecture. This year, we are partnering with the theater department for their performance of the play You for Me for You, which is about two dedicated sisters struggling to survive in North Korea who find themselves in trouble with the authorities, and they make a mad dash to cross the border to freedom. The performance is from April 17th to the 25th, and tickets are available for purchase. We specifically would like to invite you to the performances on Friday, April 24th, because we're excited to announce that the author of the production, Mia Chang, will join us for the talkback at the end of the play, and tickets are free. A special thank you to everyone who made this event possible: the Culture and Inclusive Excellence Division, the Asian Student Union, the Hope Democrats, the Departments of Women's and Gender Studies, History, and Political Studies, and the Women of Color United and the Center for Diversity and Inclusion. We truly appreciate your support. Thank you all for spending your time with us today, and have a great evening.
Great job.
All right.